Are Mercedes back? Yes, hello everyone, and how are we all doing? My name is BaxtyB, and welcome back to BaxtyB F1. And today we are going to be reviewing the Spanish Grand Prix of 2023. Let's get straight to our results card, shall we? Pole position, Max Verstappen. Race win, Max Verstappen. But in second and third place was the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell. Look, there was no catching Max Verstappen this weekend. He was dominant. His pole was easy ahead of Carlos Sainz and the surprise package Lando Norris. But in the race, the Mercedes had some fantastic pace. Hamilton leading home Russell. But they did have a bit of a coming together in qualifying, and we are going to get to that. Without further ado, let's get to our talking points. Are Mercedes back? This was encouraging. This was the first race where we were really going to see the power of the new Mercedes upgrades. Obviously, Monaco was not the track to show this off, but yeah, Mercedes looked good. I mean, Hamilton looked like he had some really good race pace. He probably should have done a little bit better in qualifying, let's be honest. He made a bit of a mistake in Q3 and he only ended up qualifying P5, which was then promoted to P4, following penalties for Pierre Gasly. Russell, on the other hand, had a poor qualifying, as we know, made a mistake in his first run in Q2, went to go for another run, went to pass Carlos Sainz, and then hit Lewis. We're going to get into a bit more detail about that, but he showed some fantastic pace in the race as well. He just looked superb. Made a load of great passes. His pass on Fernando Alonso and Esteban Ocon in particular as well were stunning passes, really good. As was the one on Carlos Sainz actually as well. George did a phenomenal job to finish P3. But yeah, encouraging signs for Mercedes. They're looking really, really strong. And yeah, look, are they close to Red Bull? No, not by any stretch of the imagination. But are they looking like they could start to really take hold of P2? Potentially. Aston have got a big upgrade coming in Canada, so we'll have to wait and see how that one goes for them. But actually, I think this was a good start for the new upgrades, for the new side-podded W14, and yeah, great start to this next era of Mercedes. However, we do have to talk about qualifying. I have called it George versus Lewis Part 2 because Mr. Russell made a bit of a boo-boo on Saturday. As I've said, he messed up his qualifying lap in P2, went to go for another one, went to pass Carlos Sainz, had DRS, was giving Lewis Hamilton a tow. He moved out, Lewis went to go past, and then the two of them came together and damaged each other's cars. George wasn't able to get another run. He went out in Q2. Lewis was able to get through into Q3. There's been a lot said about this from mostly Lewis Hamilton fans, kind of saying George did it deliberately. Quite frankly, I think that's a load of bullshit. Excuse my language. I think it was a massive communication error with Mercedes. I think there wasn't enough time for them to... Yeah, they should have been more aware of what was going on. They should have probably told George to hold back. It would have probably compromised him even further in Q2, but... Yeah, Lewis was on the hot lap and George made a mistake, and it was poor communication from Mercedes really, and that is what led to the coming together. I don't think this is really any justification to start a pissing contest between Hamilton and Russell fans and trying to create this narrative that George and Lewis are at each other's throats. They're not. We saw that after the race in the cool-down room. They're looking fine. It was just a mistake by the team. They'll learn from it. They'll get better. And, we've got to trust them on this regard. But, yeah, not a good look. George needed a clean weekend this weekend. And unfortunately, crashing into Lewis wasn't going to help him in that regard. Ferrari Disaster Class Part 2. Oh, Ferrari again. My God. Look, Carlos Sainz had a decent weekend. So, Carlos, you're clear, my friend. This is all really to do with Charles Leclerc, because Leclerc went out in Q1. There was a problem with his car. They did bring updates as well. They kind of went for a more Red Bull style side pod, so getting rid of the beautiful scallop side pod that just I thought served them quite well. But they clearly need the performance, and I think I'm going to it seems to me like Ferrari have put it on the car without really understanding how it works, whereas Mercedes have taken the time to understand how it works. Leclerc just had no pace. He was really struggling with the car. He said there was a problem with the rear. Ferrari couldn't really see what was wrong with it either, which is a very worrying sign. In fact, they had to brake park firmly, and Charles did start from the pit lane, which was actually the sensible decision. But even in the race, he didn't have much pace. You'd think that Ferrari should easily get into the points, even from the pit lane, but he couldn't do it. He only finished P11. It was not a good weekend for Charles Leclerc and Ferrari, and unfortunately, it was just another disaster class for them. And I want Ferrari to do better, but at the moment, I think you might need to cash out your Ferrari stock because they are not the bet to challenge Red Bull right now. I think it's Mercedes, really. And speaking of Red Bull, we do have to talk. It was another brilliant weekend for them. Max Verstappen was so far out in front. It was easy. He looked so comfortable. Checo Perez had a poor weekend he should have done better, but Red Bull have won all 7 races so far. Max 5, Checo 2. I think they could win every race this season. I really do, and that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. We don't want them winning every race. We want other constructors to win races this year. I still think Aston Martin can win a race this year. I still think Mercedes can win a race this year. Ferrari, not so sure. They could do it, but we'll have to wait and see. Red Bull just look unstoppable right now, and I think 2024 we've got to hope that one of these teams gets it right, but it's looking worrying from a competitive standpoint for sure. But you also have to respect it. Red Bull have clearly nailed it. They've got the best engineers, they've got one of the best drivers in Max, and it's an unstoppable combination right now. It really is. And finally, we're going to talk about Aston Martin because they just had no pace. They had no pace in the race. Lance Stroll did a really good job in qualifying. He qualified P5 after penalties. First time he'd out-qualified Alonso. Now, Alonso did have a problem, in fairness to him. He broke his floor in Q1, and that compromised him for the rest of qualifying. He still got it into Q3, in fairness to him. So, he didn't do too badly. But just in the race, they just had nothing in comparison. The Mercedes breezed past both of them. I mean, Lance, to his credit, did take Lewis on lap 1. Now, obviously, Lewis did have a little bit of a coming together with Lando Norris. So I think, it was maybe he was protecting his car, but Lance looked good on lap 1, but within a few laps, Lewis was just he breezed past. And it was easy for both of them as well. It was not difficult for the pair of them to do. It was... in a straight line, that Merc looked quick. Clearly, these new upgrades have worked for them, but Aston just had nothing. I mean, at one point, Alonso was being legitimately chased down by Zhou Guanyu. And it was a worrying time for Aston. Alonso's being very bullish about the Canadian upgrade. He thinks that's going to get them back in front of Mercedes. We'll have to wait and see. We know the Aston isn't the greatest in a straight line, certainly compared to Red Bull and to Mercedes and Ferrari, but they've got work to do, that's for sure. Though, what I will say, and one of the most shocking moments of the race was that Fernando Alonso said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to pass Lance. Let's get the points for the team." Very un-Fernando Alonso thing to do. If that was for a podium, guarantee you Fernando would have been asking them to get Lance out the way or saying, "I'm going to race him." You bet. Right, fight of the day, pass of the day. So for fight of the day, this is an obvious one. There was a brilliant, almost race-long three-way fight between Nico Hülkenberg, Zhou Guanyu and Yuki Tsunoda, and the three of them just exchanged places. And it was only for about P13, but it was a really, really good fight. Obviously, there was a bit of a problem near the end. Tsunoda basically shoved Zhou off the track. I know there's been some debate in regard to that as to whether it should have been a penalty. In my view, I think it was harsh on Tsunoda, but it was probably the right call. We've seen them give penalties for that before. They had to do it. Pass of the day, I'm going for George Russell. And his pass in particular on Esteban Ocon. He left it super, super late, and it was a wonderful outbraking move by George. Really controlled as well, which I think is going to serve him well in the future. Definitely. He positioned it really, really well. There was nothing Ocon can do to stop it. And really, really good move by George. Donkey of the day. This was a hard one. Checo Perez was up for this again, but I haven't gone for Checo Perez in that regard. I've actually gone for Lando Norris because I think Lando threw away a really good chance of some points with his first lap move on Lewis. I know it wasn't entirely his fault. Max forcing Carlos off and kind of compromised the front three in front of Lando, but he should have been more aware of not driving into the wedge in front of him, and he was just trundling along at the back, unfortunately, and not a good time for Lando in that regard. So let's get to the driver ratings. I'm sure you've already seen this on Twitter already. It's been up for a day or two now. Max Verstappen, I've given him a 9, and he would have had a 10 had he not been a silly boy in the race and got himself a black and white flag for track limits. He'd done everything right. He got pole, he was dominating the race, but for that reason, I'm not giving him a 10 because that was silly from Max. He should have been more aware of track limits. I get that he's wanting to push, but there are rules and they have to be followed. And you could hear GP getting annoyed with him on the radio. So yeah, not a good look there for Max. So he does get a 9. Checo Perez out in Q2, came back to finish P4. Realistically, should have got George Russell. Should have had the pace to chase him down. He is in the fastest car on the grid. Didn't work out for him, so he gets a 7. Not his finest weekend, unfortunately. Charles Leclerc gets a 6. I feel a bit harsh giving Charles a 6, but realistically I can't give him any higher. He did go out in Q1. I know it wasn't his fault, but in the race he just didn't have that much pace and really struggled. And even with Tsunoda's penalty, he couldn't get himself into a points position. So yeah, Charles just didn't have it this weekend. I know it wasn't entirely his fault. He did have one hand tied behind his back, but he didn't make the most of it, so I do have to give him a 6. Carlos Sainz gets an 8. Really good qualifying. P2, that's probably higher than I think Ferrari were expecting. Made a good effort into turn 1 with Max, but then obviously Max did have him under control, even if he did go a little bit far with it. And then he had a decent race. He had good pace, but was kind of powerless to stop the Mercedes and the Red Bulls. I think on this particular weekend, Ferrari were probably the 3rd or 4th quickest, and I think he maximised that performance as best he could. He gets an 8 from me for that. George Russell gets an 8. Now, I've seen somebody call me out on this because his race was phenomenal, and his race was a 10 out of 10, but his qualifying was a complete stinker. Hit Lewis, went out in Q2, and that's why he's getting an 8. If he'd had a marginally better qualifying, he probably would have got a 9 or even a 10. But for that performance alone in qualifying, he loses 2 points. Lewis Hamilton, 2nd week in a row, gets a 9. Phenomenal. He loses a point for his qualifying. He didn't qualify as well as he could have done. I think P2 was there for him to take. But he sewed up P2 pretty easily and pretty quickly as well. Once he got past Lance Stroll and Carlos Sainz, it was easy running for Lewis, and he put in a really good drive. Rightfully named driver of the day, but not my driver of the day, actually. I know I've just said rightfully, but I think people were voting for Perez and Russell as well, and I think of those 3, Lewis was probably deserving of that. You could say Russell as well, but I thought Lewis was better in that regard. Esteban Ocon gets a 7. He qualified in the top 10. Kind of stuck around there. He would have got an 8 had he not done that move on Fernando Alonso where he kind of shoved him out quite late. That was a bit naughty from Esteban, and he gets a slap on the wrist and he loses a point from me. Pierre Gasly, I feel harsh giving Pierre a 6, but hear me out on this. Qualified really well, but he got 6th place grid penalty. Naughty boy, Pierre. Naughty boy. And there was no arguing against them as well. It was clear as day. And in the race, he did okay. But it didn't really figure too much. He should have been getting, with his pace, should have been getting closer to Ocon, and he didn't. So for me, Gasly gets a 6. Norris and Piastri both get 7s. Norris, I know he got donkey of the day, but that qualifying performance was enough to get him a 7, and I think if he'd had a better race, he would have been pushing an 8, 9 or 10, but that mistake really cost him, and, could have been a really good haul of points for McLaren, but unfortunately he just couldn't get it done. Piastri, you know what, he did the best he could. It still wasn't a great performance, but he did an alright job in a car that just wasn't delivering. That car was clearly set up for qualifying, and in the race they just went backwards. He was combative, he fought hard, but not a lot he could do really. Valtteri Bottas gets a 6. Now, this was done before I realised he had a problem with his floor, but I'm going to keep his rating at a 6 because Bottas said he had a major damage to the floor, hence why he was so slow. But Bottas is on... I'm keeping an eye on Valtteri. I'm keeping an eye on him. He's struggling. He's not doing the job that I thought he would do. Zhou Guanyu's getting closer to him. He really is. And Valtteri's not performing. And yeah, if he wants to be an Audi driver in a few years' time, he needs to step up his game. You know, Théo Pourchaire is knocking on the door. Zhou Guanyu's doing a phenomenal job. And let's not forget, Audi are rumoured to want either Sainz or Norris to join the team. Come on, Valtteri. Step your game up. Bring back that Mercedes, Valtteri. We need him. And Alfa Romeo need him as well. The brilliant qualifier and good racer. And he's not been there for a while now. And I want to see him do better. Zhou Guanyu was my driver of the day. Yes, he got an 8. There were higher scores in there. But Zhou Guanyu put in a brilliant performance. At points, he was legitimately chasing down Alonso and Russell. He had really good pace. He out-qualified Bottas as well. Zhou Guanyu quietly going about his business. And not many people are realising how well he's doing because he's not always scoring in the points. But I want to give Zhou Guanyu a lot of credit. He's doing really, really, really well. And he deserves a lot of credit from everyone. Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll both get 7s. They both qualified in the top 10, but their pace just wasn't there. So I can't really say any more about that. I think they did the best they could to come home 7-8, really. Yeah, they could have done marginally better, but yeah, 6-7 even they came in, wasn't it? But yeah, not a good day at the office for Aston Martin. They're confident about these Canada upgrades, so let's see. Magnussen, a 6. Didn't really do much, did he? Was quite combative, but not much. Can't really say more than that. Hulkenberg with a 7. He was better in qualifying and was part of that great battle with Yuki and Zhou, but probably did as well as he could do. But I think Kevin and Nico need to be careful. Ollie Behrman is doing really well in F2. He's a Ferrari young driver. They might want to look over their shoulders towards Ollie Behrman. If he does better in F2, he could take their seat, very possible. So they need to up their game a little bit. Not much, but just a little bit. I think Nico's qualifying pace has been superb, but we'll see how this one shakes out. Tsunoda gets a 7. Look, Yuki I think would have had an 8 because his pace was really good, but that penalty, as I said, as harsh as it was, I think it was the right call. He did force Zhou off. It was a tight battle. We've seen the stewards give it for less. This was a bit of a slam dunk for me, and he was receiving of a penalty. He would have got an 8 had he not got that penalty. De Vries, 6, trundled along, not really doing much to instill confidence in him. Please step up your game, Nick. I thought Monaco was a turning point. It clearly wasn't. You need to step it up. You really need to step it up. And then Albon and Sargent both get 6s. They're both out in Q1. They trundled along at the back. Didn't really offer much. We're kind of just there. Kind of just happened. What I will say, though, about Williams is that we saw their floor and no Venturi tunnels at all on their floor. Their floor is almost like sheet metal. James Vowles said they're a long way behind the curve, and we now see how far behind the curve they are. And it kind of puts into perspective how well Alex Albon's done this year. With the fact that their floor is so underdeveloped, and that's where the majority of the performance comes from. So, long road ahead for Williams, but I think in Albon and Sargent right now, they've got the best drivers available to them. Okay guys, well that's all I have time for today. A sort of quick review of the race. I want to hear from you, comment below, let me know. I've just seen we went past 80 subscribers as well, which is nice. I want to thank you all for your continued support. We're getting closer to that 100 mark. I'd like to get that by the end of the year, and then we can start moving towards slightly bigger numbers like 500 and 1000. But comment below, let me know, do you agree with my driver ratings? Remember, my word is final, but I'll happily discuss it with you. And yeah, we're going to have a little bit of a break for Canada. I'm hoping to get a Canada review out on time. Contract is we're kind of entering a really hectic phase for the contract right now, so please do bear with me if I don't get a Canada review out quickly in 2 weeks' time. And look, I said I would do a stream for Baku and Miami reviews. Let me know if you want me to do that. I have capabilities to do it. Let me know, and I will happily do that for you at some point in the next few weeks. As I said, contract is hectic right now, so I've got to be a little bit careful. Well guys, if you have enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe to my channel. Like the video and subscribe. There we go, losing my ability to speak English. Until next time guys, stay safe, and I shall speak to you all very, very soon.